Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in about 10 to 20 seconds once more people join. Okay, great. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here today to learn a little bit more about student life at Berkeley Law. My name is Alice Young. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Admissions for Outreach and Recruitment in the JD Admissions Office. And I'm joined here by some of our second and third year students who are going to answer questions you have about what it's like to be a law student, how their law school admissions application journey was for them, and what they're doing in law school, or perhaps what they're looking to do after law school. We've done a number of webinars over the last few months. So this one is not going to focus too much on our admissions process or go too much into the academics of law school. We have a number of recorded webinars on our page if you're looking to go in depth about our application process. We've also hosted some webinars with our centers here, like the Center for Law and Technology. So this is really more just to hear from students and for us to answer your questions. So I have some pre-prepared questions for our students here. So we're going to start with their introductions and hearing from them. And then we want to hear what questions you have. So please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to write in any questions, and we will get to those in the second half of our session today. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and each of you could introduce yourselves, where you grew up, where you went to college, if you worked at all before coming to law school, and then what you are interested in at law school. We'll go ahead and start with you, Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a 3L at Berkeley. I grew up in upstate New York and then the Charlotte area of North Carolina. And then I went to college at U Chicago, where I did history and gender and sexuality studies. And I fell in love with Chicago, so I'm moving back there after graduation. But I spent my gap year doing the Disney College program in Orlando. So I've kind of lived all over the country at this point. And I've taken a wide variety of public interest and business law courses here. When I graduate, I'll be doing transactional work at a big firm in Chicago and also doing some domestic violence pro bono work at that firm.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Katie. And we can just popcorn it around. Jasenia, did you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasenia. I am a 2L, and my hometown is Mendota, California, which is a small town in the Central Valley here in California. And my undergrad major was political science. My post-college work, I took a couple gap years between law school and undergrad. So I took 6 years in between, and I did a couple things. I worked at an immigration law firm. I worked for the United Farm Workers Foundation doing immigration outreach work. And I also worked at UC San Diego doing some student affairs work. And I post law school, or this upcoming summer, I'll be working at a law firm doing commercial litigation work. And I guess I'll popcorn it over to Yara.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yara, she, her. Hometown is a complicated concept for me. I'm a first generation immigrant, but I was born and raised in the Middle East, in Kuwait and in Egypt, and moved to Boise, Idaho. So I guess Boise, Idaho would be the US home. My undergrad major is in international business with a minor in Arabic. For 2 years of my undergrad and for 5 years after I graduated, I spent at the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. I'm a 2L, and area of interest, like what I'm interested in is also kind of complicated, but basically anything that mitigates the harm from the criminal punishment system, I am interested in. And but for now, I've taken a position this summer, and hopefully when I graduate at a big law firm, and I'm hoping to do transactional work there. And last but not least, Ariel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel. I am from the DC, Maryland area. My undergrad school where I went to undergrad was University of Maryland, College Park, go Terps. I'm a 2L at Berkeley, and my pronouns are she, hers. After undergrad, I took 5 years off. So I went to grad school for a year as part of like a 4-year, 5-year program. And then I worked in journalism at NBC in DC, covering politics, which kind of makes sense for why I decided to go into law. I think after law school, I will continue working at a big law firm. That's where I worked last summer for my 1L summer, and I'll be there again this summer. But hopefully eventually I'll move into public interest. And in big law, I'm doing public law and policy work, which is, I guess, as close to helping people as you can get or trying to make a difference in big law. So we'll see how that goes.
Wonderful. Thank you for the four of you for being here. That's a really good segue into the first question, which I hear all the time from prospective applicants, is should I take a gap year or should I go directly to law school? So it sounds actually like all of you took at least a year off. We do have some of our other student ambassadors who are what we call KJDs. They went straight from kindergarten to law school and didn't take time off. So when you were thinking about applying, what made you decide to take time off and what did you do during that time? And Yara, did you want to start?
Sure. I was a single parent and going to school full time and working full time. So I just really needed a break. And I knew law school was going to be a very heavy lift for me. So I decided to work. And I don't know if I planned to, take the 5 years off, but I was really enjoying what I was learning working at a nonprofit. And I thought the experiences that I gained there were really, really valuable. And I think that, folks that do take time in between law school and undergrad bring such a richness to the conversations that happen in the classroom. And, the experience is so valuable to how we're thinking about the law. So I don't have any regrets there. I appreciated taking the time to make sure I had as much spaciousness and capacity as I could going in. And not, being really burnt out from undergrad still. So it definitely worked for me. Or should I pass it to someone? I'll pass it to Katie.
Yeah, I thought about going straight through for a bit because I was one of those people that always knew from high school that I was going to go to law school. And I also I knew that if I went straight through for 3 more years, I was probably going to burn out. It doesn't always happen. It's a very personal decision. I have friends who are, like Alice said, KJD, who are having a good time here. But I just knew that for myself, I wanted to have a bit of a break. And then even beyond that, once you start law school, you're one way someone described it to me once is you're on a train that just does not come back to the station. Like you're doing a legal internship and then you're back in classes, and then another legal internship and then back in classes and then bar and then job. And I wanted to have a chance to try something fun and new, even if I knew it was just a gap year, and just do something fun for a year, which is what working at Disney was. And I don't regret that in the slightest. So if there's anything else, like maybe a grad program or some kind of experience that you're thinking of, definitely feel free to go ahead and do it because law school will be waiting for you.
And I guess before moving on to our next question, Ariel, did you just want to comment on coming from maybe a non-traditional legal background, since you're in, you were heavily in journalism beforehand? That's another related question that we get is does it have to be something law related? Can I go and do something else? And for you, what made you decide law was the next step for you?
Yeah, so I initially started off undergrad as a government and politics major, which is the same thing as poli-sci, because I knew I wanted to go to law school and I thought that was the path you had to take. And then I hated it and I was bad at it and I wasn't doing well because I didn't like it. So I eventually stumbled upon journalism by taking a general education course, and then I got involved in that. And I did much better, and I realized that I was super passionate about that work, and that's what sort of kept me away from going to law school for so long, because I was having such a great time doing it. But I think that it's really important to remember first that law school, when you're applying, I think it makes you sometimes a little, not necessarily more interesting, but it gives you a little more to talk about, because a lot of people majored in government and politics or poli-sci, and that's totally fine. But I think it gives you a different perspective sometimes for certain classes, just like the way that you're looking at your undergrad experience. Like journalism, that was a lot of writing, which I was sort of like, am I wasting my time? Like, am I not going to use this? And that's all we do in law school because I want to do litigation. So that's great. I think that it's totally okay to have another major. One of my best friends, she was a computer science major and she's doing really well in law school. So I think some people are sort of worried if they have less of like the fine arts or like humanities background that they might struggle in law school. And that's definitely not the case. I think it's just sort of whatever you're good at and whatever you are passionate about, do that in undergrad. And then like the rest of it will fall into place for law school. I don't think there's any one path you have to take.
I think that's excellent advice. So Jasenia, let's start with you for the next question, which is, what was your law school application experience like? Did you apply to a lot of schools or did you have a pretty short list? And how did you ultimately decide to attend Berkeley Law?
Yeah, so I guess my law school application process was pretty long in the sense that I wanted to only take 1 year off. And then I did a lot of I did a pre-law program that helped me do the LSAT and all this good stuff. And then I took the LSAT and I didn't do well. And it kind of discouraged me from retaking it. And I felt like it's just maybe this wasn't the space for me. So then I was just kind of focusing on working. And then once I was working, I was like, yeah, never mind. I really want to go to law school. I know this is what I want to do. And I just need to really focus on retaking the LSAT. And so I did that. And I applied to, I don't know, I probably applied to 25 schools. And I was able to narrow it down by one, the schools that admitted me. And then two, once I had the options, I was just talking to people. I reached out to people from different schools and I was surprised, a lot of people from different schools are really nice, including Berkeley. And the people that I got to talk to at Berkeley were from La Alianza, which is the Latinx group here on campus. And I felt like they kind of just gave me really good advice. And I mean, to put it simply, the vibe was just really there. I felt like the people were people that I could see myself sharing space with. So it was a difficult decision. I didn't really initially see myself in the Bay Area, but now that I'm here, I'm like, I would have been out of my mind to pick another school because I've loved my experience here so far.
That's great to hear. I'll also say for the 2Ls that are here on the panel, I think they had an even tougher decision than a normal year in that we were going through the pandemic as this was all happening. And so we had planned our usual on-campus admitted students weekend and literally had to cancel it a week ahead of time. And so you were all making a decision based on mostly virtual interactions, which is hard to do, and if you're not familiar with the Bay Area. So I think it was, the stakes were even higher, I guess, at that point. Katie, I think I've heard you answer this question before, and your process, I think, was a little bit different. So let's hear from you about how you kind of went through that process. And I see we have a question in the Q&A that's very similar to this question on how did you end up with Berkeley, and what were your, were there any deal breakers for you when you were considering which law school to attend?
Yeah, so I ultimately applied to 8 law schools, and there were a lot of schools that I just kind of knocked out of the running from the beginning before applying because I took very seriously where I was going to be living, because it's 3 years of your life. And so I only wanted to go to places where I knew that I would be happy living there, which I think that that's a very important consideration that people don't always take into account. But I didn't really have a front runner, which seemed great while I was applying and then became very stressful later on in the process. And I was fortunate enough to be able to visit Berkeley because there was a grant that covered the flights to come out, and I was able to get the time off work and do the in-person admitted students weekend. And that was why I came, honestly, getting to be on campus and getting to be with other students and seeing all the different orgs that I could join. And I walked away wanting to join, I think, 20 different things. And then I did join, I think, 10 once I got here. And just seeing myself as a part of the community before even coming here, kind of similar to what Jasenia was saying with the phone calls. I stayed with a queer caucus member and just got dragged to every single event and felt like I was part of that community before I even came here, which was a really cool experience for me. And so that was a big part of it. Also the opportunity to do journal work and pro bono work as a 1L. That was a really big deal. That's not necessarily true everywhere, but that's something you can do at Berkeley. So that's all kind of why I came to Berkeley. I came here, I fell in love with it. I canceled my visit for the next weekend, and I ultimately accepted.
Great, thanks so much. Did anybody else want to jump in? Any thoughts on the application process or school selection before we move on? Okay, great. Let's move on to slightly different topic. So, which I think does have a lot to do with school selection, and that is, how would you describe the culture of the law school and the learning environment? Yara, did you want to start?
Yeah, it was definitely a huge part of why I chose Berkeley Law. You just hear stories about, that it's going to be really competitive and cutthroat and it's stressful and all of that. And I wanted to make sure, like Jess was saying, the vibes were good. That was really important to me. Like that I wanted to be, because you're going to be around these people a lot, a lot. And these are going to be your study group members and people you collaborate with on group projects and pro bono projects and journals and all of these things. So it was really important for me that the culture and the vibes were chilled, for no better word. But I like right before how we were just being normal right before we decided it was a pandemic. Well, literally the weekend before we decided it was a pandemic, I was in the Bay Area for work, and I just, begged the people that were driving, like, stop in Berkeley. Let me just walk through this building real quick. And I walked through the building and met a few people. And I really, like, as soon as I was done walking through the building, I just knew. I was like, this is somewhere I can be. Like, it feels like these are my people. We have shared struggle. I felt like some connection already. And I had toward other campuses. So like, I didn't like that. It didn't jump out at me as much. So that was really important to me. And I think that learning environment, people are willing to help each other. There's shared outlines, shared resources. You can, there's office hours, professors are very open and available. So it felt like I had resources around me if I needed help. So, and that was also really important for me because it's so foreign to me, law school. I don't know anybody in law school. I don't know. I was so first gen. I didn't even know you had to work during the summer. Like someone had to tell me that my first semester. So like just having people where I didn't feel like ashamed about that with, and felt like I can ask these questions and be lost with each other kind of. And that was really important to me. So as how I would describe it is, of course you have people who take it very seriously and, are competitive and, really serious about doing well academically. But there's plenty of people that are just like trying to get as many excellent lawyers to the finish line together,
Ariel, did you want to add on sort of about like how was your 1L experience and particularly with your classes there? For those of you that don't know, for our 1Ls, at least for the first semester, you don't get to choose which classes you take. So we place our students into modules so that you're at least seeing the same sort of faces every day, but it is quite different than the rest of law school where you get to choose, the classes that you really want to take. So how did you find 1L year and like your support to get you through that?
So as you guys probably know, our 1L year was entirely on Zoom, which was like traumatic and also fun at the same time, if I'm being honest. Like doing law school is hard in person. Doing it on Zoom was just like a whole other thing. And I think I didn't even realize how like difficult it was until this year doing it in person, that I was like, oh, wow, like we really did that last year. I'm proud of us. That was very difficult. So I think, it was an interesting experience to start law school. Like some of us in our childhood bedrooms, like some of us were still home. I was on the East Coast because I thought I was moving out to Berkeley before the pandemic. And so I like got rid of my apartment. I moved in with my parents and it was supposed to be for like 2 months. And then it ended up being longer than that. So that was just like a very jarring. And I think a lot of us talk about it now. We're sort of like, we felt kind of, you thought you would be so isolated and you wouldn't be able to meet people, because I spent the majority of last year on the East Coast while other people like Jess were here. And Berkeley, I don't know how they did it, because, you know, sort of like the coffee chats and the Zoom hangouts were like all very awkward and very weird, like across the board for everyone, like whether it's school, whether it's work, all of those things were strange. But somehow Berkeley managed to create community on Zoom, and all of these people who I now met as 2Ls like are some of my best friends like in the world, which is bizarre because we didn't know each other before last year. So that's the kind of like Yara and Jess are talking about the vibes. And I know that sounds like very abstract, but it's so true. I don't know how else to convey that. And I think part of it's the mods. So Berkeley, like as Alice was saying, breaks you up into these small groups, and you have the same people you see every day. And even if those people don't become your best friends, they're people that were always there and you could always talk to about whatever was going on in class, or we had group chats and sort of like, you know, we try to like mimic the class dynamic of like giving someone a look when someone says something in class, or, you know, like something funny happens, like we would do it in the group chat. People would do what they called mod hangouts where they would try and meet up. We all shared outlines, which is like what you use to study for finals. And sometimes people were just like, it's really hard and I'm struggling. And other people would comment and say, you're doing a great job. Your cold call was great. Don't worry about it. Your hair looked nice. Like, it's a really great place to be if you're going to do law school. Because I think people truly at the end of the day care about each other. Like Yara said, yes, people want to do well. Yes, people want to, you know, maybe be top of their class and maybe get that really competitive job. But at the end of the day, I think everyone here really cares about each other and cares about like the community doing well and all of us going out into the world and being good lawyers. And I think I think it's like an institutional thing, and whether it's like your mod or people in your slips, which are your pro bono projects, or your affinity groups like Alianza or LaSad, Law Students of African Descent. I just think that it's like in every single thing that Berkeley has put in place for us. You can sort of build community even when you're on Zoom and you're across the country from people who you're going to be in class with every day.
Yeah, it's so good to hear that. That's what it's always so hard to describe the culture, because it definitely is, like, as you said, it's the vibe of the school. And I'm really glad that was able to come through even on, you know, in Zoom school last year. So maybe really quick, it's like if you each could say what your favorite class has been so far, and like really quickly why. We'll start with the 3L. So Katie, do you want to go first? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I don't know. So
have many great classes.
Yeah, that is what that means. I'm in a really enjoyable semester right now. But I took a 1-credit class last year, and Berkeley has these classes that are pass fail 1 credits. You just get to learn about something kind of fun for half the semester for a couple weekends or something like that, usually from a practitioner, sometimes from a professor. And I did one last fall that was TV law in the entertainment industry or something like that. And it was just so much fun to spend like a couple of Fridays and Saturdays on Zoom talking about contracts in the industry and how everything works, and learn it from somebody who's really, really, really big in the industry, and just be able to do stuff like that all the time. I think I've taken a 1 credit every semester of 2L and 3L, at least one of them. And they're usually the best part of the semester for me. So that's a point for Berkeley. I don't know if other schools do that or not, but I really like that class.
I think it's a hard question. So the 1-unit classes, I've also taken a 1-unit class every semester. And I think my favorite 1-unit class was about like litigating the border crisis, but specific to children. And, you know, we got to talk to a practitioner who does this for a living, and she was incredible and so inspiring to see the work that she does, but she also put into perspective how difficult this type of work is. And then I'm taking an immigration class right now that is a lot of work, but I like learning. It's like something that I enjoy learning. But I think my favorite, like more fun, like most fun class that I've gone to and I enjoyed going to was my negotiations class, because you get to practice like every day. Every class you negotiate with someone and you kind of go at it, and you learn how to just like speak better and communicate better.
If I'm being totally honest, class is not my favorite thing at law school, but I mean, I can talk about all the clinics I love and, you know, pro bono projects and all that. But if I have to pick one favorite class, it would definitely be a one credit that I took. It's called movement lawyering. It's taught by these completely awesome, like just so awesome women, two women of color. One is the leader of the East Bay Community Law Center, and one is a leader of the Henderson Center at Berkeley Law. And so just just powerful, iconic, dynamic duo. And the purpose of the class is to position us as lawyers when we're working in movements, to take our lead and to listen to the leadership of movement makers, organizers, activists. And every week kind of took us along a different ism and what the movement looks like now, how lawyers have held the movement back, how lawyers can be of service today, and just kind of how we can check our biases and our assumptions about what we can bring to these movements. I thought it was an amazing, amazing class, and I highly recommend it to anyone who is at Berkeley Law.
So Yara and I were both in movement lawyering together, so she stole mine. And then Jess said negotiations, which is my second one. So now I'll go to my third option. And it's a doctrinal class, which is like your core classes that you have to take, and it's constitutional law, which I know sounds like weird and maybe boring, but I'm like a history nerd. So I didn't really understand what constitutional law was, like being first gen, and I was like, I don't know what this is. Are we gonna read the Constitution? That sounds boring. But it was so interesting. And more importantly, I think it was my favorite class because it was taught by the Dean Chemerinsky, and he is like the clearest lecturer. I don't even know how he does it. He just knows everything ever about constitutional law. And it's so, you ask him any question and he's like citing cases. It's crazy. But he's such a clear lecturer. He's so willing to help students. He like basically tells you what's on the exam. Like every class you go through the pros and cons and the law, and he tells you like, these are the arguments you can make here. These are the arguments you can make here. So by the time you get to the final, you're like, oh yeah, it's just like class, I've got it. And I think before that class, I was just really terrified of doctrinal classes because we'd taken some first semester that just did not, it was not for me. And I was like, oh God, like this means I'm gonna be a bad lawyer. Like this means I'm not gonna understand the foundation. But that class really changed my thinking on doctrinal classes. And I was like, okay, it's about the professor. It's about whether or not I connect to the subject matter. And having a dean who's a professor who's so like willing to engage with students and who's so available to students. If you email him at like 11 o'clock at night, he will respond within 20 minutes. It's wild. I don't know when he sleeps. But like that's one of the things that I think also makes Berkeley unique, is that he teaches his class. So that would be my third favorite class, but I also co-sign movement lawyering and negotiations.
Yeah, I'm convinced he only needs like 3 or 4 hours a night of sleep, because we get the same thing. Like he just emails back right away. And every year he does a Supreme Court like update and review for staff. And it's just like, I just don't understand how he remembers all these dates. But it's amazing. It's amazing to see his class. He actually just taught a mock class yesterday. So I don't know if any of you were able to make that are here at the webinar today, but that'll be posted to our website in the next week. So if you want to get sort of a brief chance to see what his class would be like, definitely check that out. So just a couple more questions before we get to some of the questions in our Q&A. What surprised you most about law school? Or was there a preconceived notion that you had that maybe was proven untrue when you started? And anybody can jump in.
I mean, I'll go. I would start by saying like nothing at all. Like I thought we would just be like memorizing laws and and doing that, and it's like nothing at all like that. And even the way you learn laws, it's never just like a clear cut situation. It's definitely not a black and white situation. There's so much gray, and like everything's really muddy. And I think that like I wasn't expecting that. I thought it would be either, this is the law, this is how you break it, this is how you're following it. And nothing like, even the process of learning the laws is very, very different. It's all, through, cases and Socratic method and cold calls and all of that. Yeah, it was nothing at all how I expected. And also like the other thing I didn't expect is like after you get your doctrinals out of the way, you get to like choose your adventure, which I think is really awesome. You can choose to follow a professor around that you really like and just take every class they teach, or you can choose to like use law school to explore these really like obscure areas of law that you don't think you'll ever get to experience after you graduate, like space law or marijuana law or wine law, and like just all these cool things. Or you can like just do as much like experiential learning as you can, like just do a ton of clinics, a ton of pro bono projects and whatnot. You know, or you can just like choose to get, you know, take as many classes in a certain area of law because you know for sure that's what you're going to do when you graduate. So anyway, there's like just a million ways you can go after you get your doctrinals out of the way. And I guess I'm very happy for the flexibility. I wasn't expecting it, but it definitely like makes the last 2 years, the second 2 years, a lot easier.
Okay, final question from me, and then we'll go to our audience questions. What advice would you give to your college age self if you could go back?
I'll go first because my college age self was a mess. So she needs a lot of advice. I think that like I was one of those people, and I feel like some of you might be, who are also thinking about law school, who was like very type A, and everything had to be a certain way, and like everything had to be perfect, and everything should be like this, and there was like a certain timeline for things, and if it wasn't perfect, like then it wasn't going to be good. And I think law school, or the law school application process, really broke me out of that, because like Jess, I like bombed my first LSAT, and I was sort of like, whoa, okay, what does that mean? Like, oh God, I have to like rethink my whole life. And I think I would just tell myself, it's going to be okay. It's really going to be fine. Like you can stop worrying about it. Still try your best, but really you need to calm down, and it's all going to work out. And I think that law school and the pandemic, and I don't know if it's those two things happening at the same time for me, but I just really learned to sort of like let go of the things that you can't control and just do your best and do what you can. And I think if you bring that attitude into law school, it's super helpful, or at least it's been for me, because I just worry about what I can do, and that's all that I do. So I would just tell myself to take a chill pill and like enjoy the ride, because it seems like it's, you know, 3 years seems like a long time, or 4 years of college, or, you know, the gap year in between, but really it flies by. So just enjoy yourself and have fun and do your best, and it'll all work out.
Yeah, I think similar, like enjoy the ride. But I think for me, I was working with undergrad students before coming to law school. And I think one thing that I would like often tell them is like, don't compare your journey to other people's journey. Like it doesn't have to go, you don't have to go straight through. And if you do, that's great. And then people are telling you, you should have took a year off. It doesn't matter. Like you do what you feel is best for you, and don't compare yourself to other people. Especially when you're applying to law school, like people are going to be telling you their LSAT scores. People are going to be telling you their GPAs, and you're going to be like, that does not sound like my LSAT score or my GPA. I wasn't president of 7 orgs on campus or whatever, right? And it feels a little daunting, especially if you're like on those Reddit threads of these people who have like phenomenal backgrounds. Just don't count yourself out, and you know, keep advocating for yourself. Like your application is your chance to advocate for yourself, to be able to come into these spaces. And especially if you're a person of color or a minority, or come from a background, an underserved background, where like people like you don't usually end up in these spaces, like apply to pre-law programs, reach out to people that are similar to you and ask for help, because you could do it. Like you could come to law school and you could be very successful, even if you're the first in your family to do it.
Thank you so much. That's excellent advice. That's what I always say, like stay off Reddit or take it at least with a grain of salt, because yeah, we go in there. We you know, we want to see what everyone's saying. And there are things all the time that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is completely not true. I don't know where this like rumor came from, but yeah, I think that's, you know, completely true. To stay, you know, everybody's journey is different, and it might not be what you originally thought you would be doing, and you just have to take it one step at a time, and see what happens. So great. Well, now sort of the second half of the session is really just for your questions for our students here. So we already have a few in the Q&As. Thank you for those that wrote in. So if you do have a question, just type it into our Q&A, and we'll go ahead and answer. So I'll read out the first one. which is in a Twitter thread that was going around at the beginning of the academic year. Ian Milleheiser said some pretty hard-nosed advice to incoming 1Ls, suggesting that in order to succeed in law school and prepare for a rewarding career, mental health considerations and your work-life balance had to go out the window. How much truth is there to this? What is your work-life balance like, and how much free time do you actually have?
So I'm going to go ahead and say that that is terrible advice. If you don't take care of your mental health and yourself in law school, and you don't make time for the things that bring you joy, then you're not going to succeed in a lot of different ways. And I know there were people my 1L year who did just stay in the library all the time, and they may have ended up with fantastic grades in some of their classes, but that didn't mean that they had the same success career-wise at that point, because that was kind of all they were focusing on. So it really is all about balance. And I know for me, something that's been really important, especially given that most of my law school experience has been in a pandemic, is having certain days where I know that I have my Sunday nights to, watch the new episode of Succession and do yoga and put on a face mask and unwind and just start my week off the right way. And I will block out certain times to do fun things with friends. As you become a 2L and a 3L, you get to play a lot more with your schedule, kind of like we mentioned earlier too. And if you want to take those 3 or 4 day weekends, take them, do whatever you need to do to set yourself up to succeed in your classes, because when you are taking care of yourself and your mental health, you are just going to do better. At least that's what I've observed from me and all my friends. And then there are also all sorts of mental health resources on campus. I feel like that's worth noting right now. I saw a therapist in the Tank Center during my 1L year, and she was amazing. There are also therapists through the law school. So if that is something that you're coming to law school and you're thinking about, there are resources available.
Yeah, I also just second that. Like, I don't think that's terrible. I mean, maybe, I don't know if there's other context to it, but that specific advice is not good. Your mental health probably should be your first priority, honestly, just in general, I think, because if you're not doing well emotionally or mentally, then everything else just kind of feels overwhelming. But yeah, scheduling in, I think having a schedule, like living by your calendar, which sounds a little unhealthy, but like scheduling in, right? Like, I'm going to sleep my 8 hours and I'm going to work out if that's important for you, or watch TV, which is important for me. So like all those little things are really important, because law school is hard. And I think, I'm sure you've heard this before, and I heard it when I was applying, and I was like, but what does that mean? Like, how hard? And it's hard in the sense that it feels like there's so much to do and not enough time. So being able to manage your time and your expectations is also really important, because it's never going to feel like there's enough time. Well, for me, at least, it never feels like there's enough time, but luckily I've been able to do well, and, I'm emotionally and mentally like feeling well as well. So you just got to focus and prioritize yourself.
And I just want to say something really quickly about the question, the end of the question, how much free time do you actually find that you have? I think it sort of just depends. Like, you can have as much free time or as little as you want to have. There are very few classes that you have something that's actually due, that if you are not actively working, you will miss a deadline. Most of it is just like reading you should be doing, or some like outlining you should be doing. So for me, there are some weeks where I'm like, and today I'm not doing anything, and I just go to bed because I'm tired. And then there are other days where I'm like, okay, I have the capacity to stay up and maybe catch up on that reading that I didn't do, or to watch the lecture again and see what I missed in class. So it's sort of, you can really, in law school, you do have the freedom. It's not the same as undergrad, where like, if you didn't turn something in, it was a problem. There are very few like actual assignments. So you have complete control over your schedule in that way. And then how much free time you have is up to you and how you manage your time.
And I'll just add that you're pretty aware when it's going to peak, so you know when it's going to hit the fan, basically. So if you have some discipline about how efficiently you're using your study time, then you can have playtime. And just know that if you have too much playtime at the beginning of the semester, you'll need lots more studying time at the end. Or just it's a long game. It's a long game, and finals at the end, like, you just have to like factor in that you'll need time to prepare for that.
Thank you so much to all for rebutting that piece of advice, I guess, that was given. And I would agree with everything you all said, that, taking care of your mental health and creating some playtime, fun time for yourself is so important. On a related question that we got, somebody was curious on what your daily schedule looked like. So for example, do you have classes every day? How many and how long are they per semester? What does law school homework look like? So, and I know that's going to vary from 1L year to second or third year. So maybe if somebody could talk about kind of what 1L year looks like, and then somebody else sort of what it looks like for you now that you're out of it. I guess Jasenia, do you want to talk about like what that looks like 1L year first?
Yeah, so okay, my 1L year, you don't have control over your schedule. So I was one of the lucky mods that didn't have any 8 a.m.s. Thank you, Jesus. But there were some mods that did have some 8 a.m.s. And that's unfortunate. But yeah, so I think I made the mistake of not scheduling in sleep. Like I was like, I have to like I would schedule in like the readings, and I'll be honest, like there's some times that some professors assign so much reading and then you have those 3 classes in one day, because the classes are super random. Like sometimes you'll meet Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. It skips like a random day, or you'll just meet Wednesday and Thursday. So if your classes align where you kind of have to read for those classes, sometimes you won't. I felt like I wasn't sleeping. I fixed that my second semester, but I scheduled in my Alianza meetings, which were really important for me because that's where I was building community. Like Ariel mentioned, we were doing everything on Zoom. So I felt like we kind of had to go above and beyond to really make an effort to make friends and to build community. And I also just studied with people. Like I found my, small group of folks who were, being socially distant on their own, and we just kind of became our own little study group. And that was kind of like my combination of like hang out with friends and study at the same time. But I mean, it just really depends on what you want to do. Now it's a lot different. My schedule this semester is a lot different, and I enjoy it a lot more than my first year.
Yeah, it really does change as you go to 2L and 3L and you get more control over it. So I do have 4-day weekends. I actually have class twice a week now because my one credit ended halfway through the semester that was on Tuesdays. So once you're at that point in law school, you really get to choose how much you do or don't want to be on campus, which I think is pretty nice. I like taking the longer classes. So a few of my classes meet for about 3 hours a week once, and then that's the only time that I go to that class that week. Some people just don't like that structure at all, would rather be on campus 2 or 3 times a week. So you really get to just kind of choose what works for you the more and more time that you spend, and then you get to choose how involved you stay on campus too. So if there are different affinity groups or journals or whatever that you want to get super involved with, that is going to take up more of your time. But I think as we've all kind of mentioned, law school is pretty flexible after 1L, and it pretty much is a choose your own adventure in terms of classes and commitments and things. So everyone's day looks pretty different, but after 1L, it's a lot more designed around what works for you.
Yes, also a fan of the 4-day weekend. I already have one now. I'm in class Monday through Wednesday at 8 a.m. to noon, and then just clinic, and Fridays are mine. Nobody's touching them. As far as the homework, more specifically, I want to answer that. When you're in doctrinal classes, your homework is going to be reading cases and outlining if you find that, not outlining, sorry, briefing the cases if you find that helpful. Some people, it takes a lot of time, so some people outline, some people don't. So just a whole lot of reading. But in your first year, you're also in a legal research and writing class, and your homework for that is a lot of reading and writing as well. You actually work on a brief in stages, and by the end of the semester, you've written your first brief, and it's all professional looking and great, and you learn so much that semester. And then for other classes, I mean, for clinics, obviously you just do the work while you're there. And then there's some seminars and whatnot where they assign reading or they assign writing. You could write like an amicus brief, or and then write in advanced writing classes, you'd be working on a brief or something like that as well. But mostly for doctrinal classes, it's just a whole lot of reading, a whole lot of briefing, and then hopefully outlining along the way when you have time.
Okay, thank you so much. So we've gotten a couple of questions about experiential learning. I do want to say we're actually hosting an hour-long information session tomorrow all about pro bono at Berkeley Law, featuring students and our director of pro bono. So we'll be going into much more detail in that session, and that'll be recorded and posted to our website again. But we did get a question. Could you talk about the pro bono culture at Berkeley and how is it different than other law schools?
So I can start that. I think that Berkeley's pro bono culture is part of the school. Like if you don't want to do pro bono work, I don't know why, but if you don't want to do pro bono work, this is maybe not the place for you because it's just like so embedded in like everything that we do. Like I'm going into big law, but I've done pro bono projects. My first semester, I worked in the La Raza Tenants and Workers' Rights Clinic, or SLIP, which is a pro bono project. They're the same as clinics, we just call them different things. But basically, I every Thursday after my civil procedure class, I would go. It was all on Zoom, but we would meet with different clients who were having issues like at work or whether they were having housing issues, and we would talk to them about sort of what they can do, and there were actual attorneys there. So we would go and say like, oh, they have this problem. We don't know law. Tell us what to do. And I thought that was really helpful because it was a good way to feel connected to like the fact that what you're learning. Sometimes when you're taking doctrinal classes, you're just like, all right, I've read 60 cases. What does this have to do with anything? And like, how am I going to help people with this? And I think being able to like relate the fact that you have to learn this in order to later on connect to people with work and to understand the structure of like how cases work and where to look for the codes for like housing and things like that. I think that it's a good way to balance it out. But Berkeley, like there's so many ways, even if you don't want to do a pro bono project or a clinic, if you don't have time, there are always just like volunteer opportunities. Affinity groups and clubs send out like a newsletter every week, and that has just tons of things you can volunteer. It can be a day of volunteering. Like I did some work with election stuff last year, which was very specific to like the time. And you could drive people to the polls, or you could help people who couldn't read, like read over what their options were ahead of time. There are just so many different things you can do. It doesn't have to be a long-term commitment, but I think pro bono is really important at Berkeley. It's important to everyone from the top down. And I didn't really feel that same commitment necessarily at other schools that I was considering. They had pro bono options and it was like a thing you could do, but it wasn't like everybody does it like they do at Berkeley. Like I don't think I know anyone who hasn't done some kind of pro bono work, which I think is really helpful because even law firms care about that. So even if you don't plan on going into like public interest work, it's still really useful. And I think it's a good thing to have on your resume.
And a related question, could any of you talk about your clinic or externship experience? Katie, have you done field placement or clinic? Or I know you're signed up to do the practicum next
Yeah, I'm doing the domestic violence field placement in the spring. I did the seminar last year, really enjoyed the seminar with the professor, and I just confirmed that I'm working with the Family Violence Law Center and got everything situated. So I'm not entirely hopeful yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. I know people who did the placement in the past and they've had a good experience. So that's one thing that's not one of the traditional clinics, but it's also not a field placement that you kind of have to find on your own and apply for through the office. It's still through Berkeley. That's an option.
I can share about my clinic. I am at the East Bay Community Law Center, which is just this amazing organization. They help low-income folks with just a variety of legal needs, whether it's like consumer protections or immigration or housing. The subclinic I'm in is called the Clean Slate Clinic, and we work with folks who have criminal charges on their background. And what we do is we help them get the charges dismissed so that they can apply for housing, employment, certain, professional licenses and whatnot. And then there's also a subclinic called the Decriminalization and Poverty Clinic. And in that clinic, we help folks who have lost their driving privileges, who are stuck with fines and fees, to get an ability to pay determinations, or to try and get some of those fees waived and get their driving privileges reinstated so they can go to work and take their kids to school and, you know, just make a living and live their life, basically. I also did 2 slips, the post-conviction advocacy project, where we represented people who were serving life sentences to prepare for their parole hearings, and we represent them at their parole hearings. And then the Prisoner Advocacy Network, which is a letter writing slip, where you basically correspond with jailhouse lawyers, but also other folks who are incarcerated, and help them navigate the system so they can secure things like, you know, accommodations, or because they have a disability, or you know, gender affirming care, or file excessive force complaints and whatnot. So all of it's very rewarding work, and there's like so much to choose from. The problem is like not doing too much. Really, is like saying no, do it next year, do it next semester.
Thank you. Yeah, and as I said, we'll be going into much more detail on experiential education and pro bono, specifically our SLIPs, our student initiated legal projects, and how you can get involved in your very first semester of law school at our webinar tomorrow. So I definitely encourage you to join that if you're looking for more information. I think this is a perfect time. We've got a couple more questions. One, which I think is good because I don't think any of you grew up in the Bay Area. Is there one event on campus or in the community that you feel reflect what it's like to live in the East Bay? They're like a story, or just in general, I guess, how would you describe living here?
I guess I don't have like a specific event, but for me, moving to the Bay Area was something that I was nervous about because I'm from the Central Valley and I had spent 10 years in San Diego. So I was like, oh, like the times I've been to the Bay Area, it's gloomy, it's a little scary. But honestly, I've really enjoyed it a lot. I think one of the things that I love the most about the Bay Area is how diverse it is. And I didn't really know like what that meant when people would tell me that, but like walking, you know, around my neighborhood, because I live in Oakland, which is super close to Berkeley. I'm like 10 minutes away from school. It's just like a different, another word, vibe than what I'm used to. It's a lot more fun. People, there's a lot of young people, young professionals that are people of color. And that's like not like San Diego. I feel like San Diego is a lot older and a lot more conservative. So I really like that aspect of Oakland and the Bay Area in general.
I think as someone coming from the East Coast, I sort of didn't know what to expect because like I think on the East Coast we're always like California and we think it's like LA, so it's sunny and it's, you know, and that's just not the Bay, which I like personally because like everyone who knows me here knows that like I want to wear my rain boots and I want it to be sweater weather all the time. And so that's kind of perfect because it pretty much is here most of the time. It doesn't rain that often, but we've been having more rain. So I've been wearing my little pink rain boots around and having a good time. But I think something that's like very unique about the Bay Area as compared to like DC or other places on the East Coast, like Jess said, a lot of the young professionals, I think the vibe is very different. Like DC is a little more stuffy for lack of a better word, but people here, it's like really, it's just a really cool vibe. Like there are people who are artists or like in the food scene or people who, you know, work in tech if they work in like San Francisco. There's also just like a diversity of things you can do. Like you can wake up in the morning and go hiking, and then some people go skiing, and like there's just so much in this one area that's like very jarring to me because like DC, it's like one, weather is all the same. Like you cannot go to the beach and go skiing in the same day. That's not happening for you, but it can happen here. So that's really cool. And there's like a lot that's around. Like Jess and I just came back from a retreat for one of our affinity groups in Lake Tahoe, and that was really beautiful. And I'd never been before. So there's like a good mix of like indoor and outdoor activities. And I consider myself like an indoorsy person, but the Bay is maybe trying to change that. So I think that there's just like a lot to do here that I didn't realize before. So if you're coming from the East Coast, give it a chance. It's not like LA, but it's cool.
I'd say like another thing that's really unique about the Bay is it's clear from being here that it has long been and continues to be a springboard for activism. You could tell like social justice really like thrives here. I mean, it's not perfect by any means. There's a lot of ways that we're falling short in the Bay Area, but it has that vibe to it, that there's activists and organizers all around. You can see it in the art, you could see it in the positioning of certain businesses and whatnot in certain communities. So that to me comes up. And I also came from a very homogenous place, I would say. So just hearing the different languages and like just the different fruit from different parts of the world and all of that has been a real treat for me. So if you come from a place like, Idaho, you're in for a treat.
Thank you all. I would echo everything you said. I also grew up in San Diego in Southern California, and there were a couple things that shocked me, or I guess were good that I liked here was like the weather, that like we do get a little bit more seasons. I mean, it's still not compared to the East Coast, like it's not snowing or anything, but it does get colder, which I like. I love wearing, my boots and my jackets. The food scene is really great. No matter what you're looking for, there'll be a restaurant either in Berkeley or Oakland or San Francisco that you can go to. And probably one of the biggest shocks is like public transportation, and that we actually have it here, and that you don't need a car to get around. We have BART, which is our subway system, and we have buses as well. A lot of people walk or ride their bike. We're hosting another information session. I feel like I should plug this for you all on Thursday, that Dean Alvarez is going to host with some of our students, and she's a Berkeley native. That's going to be talking all about Berkeley, living here, moving here from out of state, and what to expect, and finding housing, which is another common question. So again, either join us for that or watch the recording later, and we're going to go much more into detail about living in the area. So our last question for you all. What are some tips for maintaining your motivation or passion in applying to law school and in studying for the LSAT? What do you do to stay motivated during that kind of grueling admissions process?
I guess I would just say, like, remember what you're doing it for. I mean, for me, it was my family. Being first gen, it was like really important to set that new like path in our family, and make it like normalize it for my cousins and my nieces and my nephews, that higher education, even law school, is just, it's normal. Like, we do this on the daily. So I think for me it was just important for me to remind myself often that I was doing it for more than just myself. And then I don't know, I just like the challenge too. I was like, I'm going to prove to myself that I'm going to do well in this LSAT, because I can do well in this LSAT. And you just kind of have to focus. I think, like, just sit down, focus, write down your schedule, and figure out where you could get, the help. I was working full time, so I was talking to my boss, and I was like, can we just figure out like a way that, things are not so heavy in these certain times for me studying for the LSAT. So it worked out really well. But yeah, just find your crew, find your people that are going to support you, and stay motivated by just reminding yourself what's your why.
Any other last words of wisdom?
I guess I would say to also focus on the aspect of your application that you think you can make the strongest as well. Because I remember it felt all very overwhelming. It was like, I've got to do the LSAT, and then I've got to have my personal statement, and and like, I think you know yourself really well by now. And so you know what your strengths are. For me, I knew it was writing, and I was like, okay, this LSAT might not be going well, and I'm doing my best and trying to study here, but like, let me put some serious time and effort into making this personal statement the best it can be, because I know I can write. And I know that if I can like tell my story in a convincing and clear way, where people can connect to it, like, then that's it. So I focused on that. And then I was like, all right, LSAT, come on. Like, so just don't get discouraged if like some parts are more difficult than others. I think you should know that like Berkeley, and I'm sure some other schools, like, it really is like holistic application review. So it's not just your scores, you're not just a number, which is something that I had to keep telling myself because it was so frustrating during the process. But like, just like Jess said, remember your why you're doing it. and focus on your strengths and don't beat yourself up about your weaknesses, and you'll be okay. It's tough though. It's tough.
And just one day at a time, one day at a time.
One day at a time, one step at a time. It's a journey. As we said, stay flexible, stay positive. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you at some of our webinars. Thank you so much for our student panelists for sharing your stories. I'm also going to include in the chat here a link to our website with all of our ambassador profiles. They all have their own email addresses. So if you want to, reach out with any other questions or continue the conversation that we're having here today, you're welcome to do so. So thank you everybody, and have a great rest of your day.